In this chapter, we're going to be painting a floral favourite, the peony. And we're going to be painting in watercolour. Just 3 colours, our peonies that I'll be referencing, but you can work from my demo. That's probably the easiest way for us to start, that you kind of copy the motions that I'll be putting down on paper.
Today we'll be painting this beautiful arrangement of peonies. I'll be painting 3 to 4 big open petals, a bright yellow textured centre, and then some smaller petals that wrap around.
I'm going to be working today on this watercolour pad. It's nice and heavy. It's not going to buckle too much because the paper is thick. And when I say buckle, I mean it's not going to go all sort of curvy on you as you lay down water. I've got my reference here. I've got my palette. I've got my 3 watercolours. We've got a blue, a magenta, and a yellow. The brush that we're going to be using today is just one brush, and it is a filbert, and it's got that lovely oval shape. This is a 1-inch filbert. You could use a smaller version of the same brush if you like, no problem. I've got my 2 jars of water. I like to have 2 jars of water so that one can get super dirty and I don't have to worry about putting that dirty water back on the page because I've got a clean one just to get off any excess. And first up, we're going to squeeze our paint straight into our palette. I'm going to begin with the blue, and I'm putting in, I'd say, it's really the size of a pea because we're only working on a small piece of paper today, so you don't need to use a ton of paint, and it goes a long way. I like to leave a gap between my colours so that I can mix other colours. I can add one to the other and use the other little spaces to mix those new colours. So I'm going to give that a bit of space and do my pea shape over there of the magenta. Finally, squeeze a bit of yellow in there. I am going to, before I begin, just take a little bit of each of the colours and create a lighter tone, a wash colour of that condensed, saturated dollop. So I'm going to add in water so that it's almost full, but you don't want it sort of spilling out everywhere. So just add in a little bit more water. And what happens when we do that is we get what's almost like an ink, and it's great for doing sheer washes of colour where you just want like a tiny hint of colour, but nothing too crazy. All right, so let's begin. Now our first layer is going to be the outline of our flower. And we're using, I'm letting that really soak into my brush so the brush gets quite saturated and wet with the colour. I'm using that inky one, the light colour of the 2. And we're using that as just a sort of wash. I'm going to come in and lay down some petal shapes. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And I'm kind of moving my body. I'm coming from the outside into the middle of the flower. Outside, in, outside, in. There we go. And I'm kind of referencing this flower over here and I'm looking back. All right, so now I'm going to just change the angle of my brush a little bit. And I'm using a bit of a sort of slicing movement. So I'm going to use the side of my brush, the edge of my brush, and I'm going to just push down and lift up. So I'm just going to push down and lift up. And by doing that, we're creating the side of the flower. So it looks like it's turned a little bit. And another one. Maybe one more, and then I think I'll just do one more that's a bit fatter there. So that motion again is like this. And don't be afraid to have another piece of paper on the side to practice these if you want to before you go on to your main paper. So this is still nice and wet, which is great because the next thing I want to do is add a little bit more depth. And I'm going to do that by dipping into the pink that didn't have so much water in it. And I'm just going to add in some areas to give a little bit more depth to the flower.
What I mean by adding depth is that we will be going back over our original shape and adding strokes with the less watered down paint to create more dimension.
Usually those are sort of the bits where, you know, the shadows are, or the deepest part of the flower, which might be in the center. Again, I'm just doubling up on that shape again. I'm just going over the top of what I already did. So I've got a few more of those lovely sort of side of the brush moments. There we go. It's a bit of a dance, right? You want to be moving with your paintbrush. So don't be afraid, even if you you really want to get into it and really stretch out, that's fine. I still have some paint on my paintbrush. So I think I might use it and just add in one of these lovely bulby bud shapes. And that's really just a circle. You could splat your brush straight down, boom, and pull up and see what happens. Oh, I mean, it's just lovely. All right, I'm going to just add a little bit more to that circular shape, and I'm just going to leave it there. Next up, I am going to wash out this brush, and I'm going to dip into my yellow colour because I want to do the centre of this flower, the stamens. Those are the little tiny things that the bees always like to land on with the pollen. So these little guys up here, sort of a bit yellow, some have got a little bit of orange in them. So what I think I'll do is just maybe create something that's closer to an orangey kind of colour by just dipping the tiniest amount in my red and adding it to the yellow. That's perfect. That's all you need. Don't need to make a ton of it because they're only going to be a tiny little amount in here. And I'm going to hold my brush, I'm going to let it sort of dangle a little bit between my fingers. So I'm not holding it too tight, and I'm not tight. I'm just kind of like this. And I'm just going to dab it, dab, let it just drop and touch the paper, and that's it. And that's all you have to do. The only thing that you might want to do is just change the direction of the brush. So you're really just twirling and dabbing. Twirling and dabbing. Because as you can see, they're sort of all over the place in the middle of the flower. And that's what you want to kind of recreate. Maybe I'll dab into the yellow just to change up what's happening in there. And add it in. And it's bleeding just a little bit into that pink, which I think is a lovely moment. You could also, if you wanted to, add in just a tiny bit of green, because there is a little bit of that in there as well. So maybe I'm just adding in a tiny touch of green as well. Leave it at that. Wash out your brush. I want to do a sister flower to this one. And I'm going to just dab off my brush because I want this to be a little bit of a darker tone. And the way that we do that is just using less water. So it does have a little bit of water in my palette here with that pea-sized blob that we put in to begin with. I'm going to really load up my brush. So you can see I've got the tip of the brush is really quite nicely covered. I'm going to use up all of the pink that I have in there. And then I'm going to apply the same sorts of movements as we did in the first flower, but just at a different direction. Because you don't often see flowers all facing the same way like this at you. You know, you want some that are on the side, some that are sort of, you know, hiding in the background. So let's change the direction of that. And I'm going to change my posture as well so that I can kind of move with the flower, right? So I'm going to squidge down, squish. Squish. Add a little bit in there just to change the shape of the petal. Squish. Loving these textual moments that are coming in here as well. Sort of embracing what the brush is giving me. I'm just scratching it across the surface of the paper, and I absolutely love all these little delicate moments that are happening. Because when you look at the petals of peonies, they actually have lots of texture going on in them. So this is kind of ideal. I'm going to just mold my brush back to its normal shape. And I'm going to go push down and lift up. Push down, lift up. Maybe I'll dip into a bit more water. Push down, push down. Changing the angle, coming from a different side. One more. And I think we should leave it right there. I like how that's looking. All right, I'm going to just dip back in, do the same thing for the center there. Mix up a little bit more of that orangey kind of yellow color. And hold my brush loosely again and dab. Just little tiny marks. Maybe dip into the yellow again so we get some brighter kind of bits in there. What happens if I put it over the top of the pink? Let's see. Because it's thick, it does sit on top of the pink, which is nice to see. I think that looks quite nice. We're done. Maybe just do a bit more of that green. And green is the next colour that we are going to mix together because we're going to just join this all together with some stems. Now I have a nice bit of green on there, but I'm going to wet my brush just a bit more. And the reason I want my brush to be quite wet is because I want a sort of nice smooth line. If my brush was still dry, it would really drag over the paper. And because I want sort of a bit more of a fluid motion, it's really nice to have a wet brush for that. So I've wet my brush, I've dipped into this light green colour, and I think it's nice to start with a lighter green because it's a little bit less intimidating than going straight for a dark green, right? So, you know, this is always a bit intimidating. I always used to be really scared of doing stems because they could get really wormy. And, you know, you'd be really worried about it being straight or it, like having a wobble in the middle. And the key that I found to that is just to do dashy lines, right? Not one continuous line that sort of can be a bit wormy. And the way that I've learned to do that is by loosening up my upper body. So I'm dipping in to my colour and I'm thinking about the direction I want these to be. And I kind of almost do it before I lay my paintbrushed paper, right? So I'm going to go, all right, that's my motion, that's my motion, that's my motion. And then I'm holding my brush very loosely and I'm going to go like that. And I'm not going to worry about where it finishes. And I'm going to load up again. And I'm going to do the same thing for this one. And that's just movement, and then there we go. Just a light little indication of a stem. I'm going to continue this up here. Just little tiny dabs. Now, what I was talking about just before, colour moving through, right, and adding in colour. This is still wet. So when I touch this colour, this deeper green on top, see how it's just starting to kind of flow through this channel that I've already created. So I can just dab in, and it's way less scary doing it that way than going in with a thick kind of green colour to begin with. So I think that's a really nice start. I am going to add a few more because these peonies have quite a few leaves. So let's talk about leaf shape. Create my colour. Get a bit more in my palette there so that I don't run out. I'm just blue and yellow, blue and yellow. I know I'm not using my yellow again, so I don't mind that I'm getting it a bit messy now. And I'm going to add in just a touch of this pink, just to dirty it up a bit. All right, that looks pretty good. Now let's look at the shapes we've got here. Again, I'm thinking, all right, which direction am I going to go? I have one going this way, all going up. I want it to look pretty. I want it to sort of flow. So I'm going to go with the motion of the stem. I'm just going to start by touching the brush to the paper, push down and lift up. Next to it, push down and lift up. Push down and lift up. And you just continue that until you've built up enough of a foliage section that you're happy with. I'm not going to go crazy with these. I'm just going to add in a few more different tones of the greens. Ready? So you're just, let me just show you that again, because I know leaves can be a bit tricky and they take a bit of practice. I'm going to get a bit of a curve on this one, so I'm pushing down, changing my posture and pulling off. Push down and pull up. The only way to get better at this is just keep doing them. That's it. That's all there is to it. I promise you, my leaves, when I first started out, didn't look like this. And that's okay. Saying that, you know, I still like when I have random bits that are just sort of like, just kind of some of these, you know? I love imperfection. Just making a bit of a denser green, the darkest green now, because I feel more confident now that I can put a dark green on top. So I'm just gonna, that's it. Like, the movement really shows through in a painting, so you can see the gesturalness of a mark and how quickly you placed it down. And I think that's really important and lovely to see, because it gives life to it, life to a painting. Right, I think I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. I might just put in a couple of some little light moments in there too. One more stem. I'm going to just pop in a tiny bit of pink into a leaf down here. Again, because I like to move my eye around the page, even though in nature, you know, the leaves aren't pink. Have fun with it. Make them multicolored if you want. It just adds a little bit of something original and something that's sort of true to you in there. All right, let's call it a day. I'm happy with that. I'm going to let this layer completely dry. And you can always leave your artwork, pin it on your wall, come back to it in a week, you know, come back to it in a few days and add more. The best thing to do is to step away and then come back. And you'll see it in a whole different light tomorrow than today. And maybe those final marks that you make on it are just what finishes it off. All we're doing is putting down marks on paper. Just put one down, and then the next, and then the next. And before you know it, your painting will have come to life.